Christina Sambor. I've had the pleasure of appearing before this committee many times. I am here today on behalf of the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition in opposition to Senate Bill 2199. I'll pass these around for you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, first and foremost, trans and non-binary people exist, are precious, and deserve human rights. Senate Bill 2199 seeks to deny these basic truths. The sponsor mentioned talking about truth. It is an obvious truth from looking around in the room that trans people exist, and I think state policy that seeks to deny that fact by codifying a lack of recognition of that is not reflective of truth. However, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the law and what the law actually says. When we look at drafts like this, I am an attorney by training, we don't have the benefit of reading broad, kind of nondescript intent into the language of a law frequently. If there's ambiguities in a law, we have the ability in the court system to try to clarify those things, but words in the law are given their effect. And so that's kind of what I want to focus on initially in my testimony. In essence, this bill requires an imprecise and indiscernible group of people and entities to engage in unclear conduct around unknowable characteristics. If these people fail to engage in the prescribed conduct, they are to face a financial penalty that is not clearly civil or criminal in nature and is not clearly part of any civil or criminal agency's jurisdiction and not clearly payable to anyone. Respectfully, I see no way this law would pass any sort of legal challenge based on basic legal construction principles. It is vague, fails to advance any legitimate state interest, and not only would cause impermissible gender-based discrimination, its very purpose is gender-based discrimination. When preparing my testimony on this bill, I struggled to put together a coherent response. Once you spend any time trying to conceptualize what the bill is actually doing, and again, I'm trying to look at the language that we're working with in the draft, you must engage in mental gymnastics to understand how it would even work. And I'd like to give you a few examples to illustrate my point. First, a person with the name of Chris writes a letter to a school board. The school responds in writing. How does the school board determine the person's gender to ensure it is complying with this bill? Second, that same person shows up at a school board meeting, doesn't have hair or visible breast tissue due to cancer treatment. They're dressed in loose clothing and they're not wearing makeup. Again, how does the school board determine their gender to properly refer to this person? The child on whose behalf they are advocating is prepubescent and named Morgan. They attend the meeting and are dressed in a green shirt with mid-length hair. How does the school board determine that individual's sex so as to comply with this law? The screamingly obvious question from these examples presents itself: why on earth would their sex matter in these situations? What legitimate interest does North Dakota have in knowing everyone's biological sex? Furthermore, how many times a day, in what number of communities across the state, are people who work for entities that receive state funding, to Senator Sickler's point, interacting with individuals in ways that would require them to comply with this proposed statute? What types of relationships and community dynamics would this policy create? It may sound hyperbolic, but the only way this law would be enforceable is to require every person in North Dakota, not just citizens, but all people physically present in the state, to wear some sort of external indicator of their biological sex. Madam Chair, I would just point out some of the questions about DNA testing, the availability of DNA testing. If we're talking about literally communication, interaction, and things like that, the idea that then there would be some pause in interaction with Stanford, with schools, with state agencies to go get your DNA tested to prove how you should be referred to is pretty plainly unworkable. So that's why I say when you're just looking at the construction of the bill, someone's biological sex is not readily apparent unless we're all wearing some sort of indication of what our biological sex is. We need not delve too far into history to see that when we have toyed with or implemented policies that reduce people down to a single physical or racial characteristic and require certain treatment of those people based on that characteristic, which is often objectionable in the eyes of a socially dominant group, the result is a tragic and shameful chapter in human history. Getting down to the heart of the matter, I really feel this committee must stop in its tracks bills such as this one. I could give reasons and examples to you for hours about why this bill, as drafted, is not an enforceable or constitutional law. Bills can sometimes be amended to cure those deficiencies. This bill must be killed because its very goal and intent is impermissible and cruel discrimination without any legitimate goal. This cannot be cured through wordsmithing and amendments. This bill is aimed at very real and very wonderful human beings in our state who deserve to live their lives without their gender and their identity being questioned and then disregarded. The North Dakota Human Rights Coalition joins in and lifts up the many testimonies to be given today that illustrate in painful detail the harm caused to trans and non-binary people by efforts such as this bill. I implore the committee to send a message today to kill this bill and let all North Dakotans know that our state does not stand for dehumanizing our fellow citizens. Send a message that this committee will not recommend legislation that targets trans and non-binary individuals by telling them it is against the law to recognize them. What can be more cruel than to tell another human being they do not exist? And that concludes my formal testimony. In reviewing the filed testimony, I would also encourage you to look at the testimony of Deborah Hoffarth, who does a very nice job. She's from Minot, in 3 pages, really detailing the legal problems with the language in the bill. In terms of, I kind of referenced in general the legal enforceability. Ms. Hoffarth really goes in detail into the specific legal problems, conflicts with other law, conflicts with the Constitution, et cetera. And I would stand for questions.
Any questions for Ms. Sambor? Thank you.
Thank you.